What was the big secret in the mysterious life and death of Tutankhamun?
I will talk about this in this section.
In 1992, Howard Carter's discovery of the nearly untouched tomb of Pharaoh Tutankhamun in the Valley of the Kings created an enduring fascination with ancient Egyptian culture.
Tutankhamun's exquisite gold mask became an iconic symbol of Egyptian civilization.
However, these dazzling treasures revealed the shadow concealed behind the golden mask, a mystery-shrouded individual. The short and mysterious life of Egypt's child king raises questions about his parentage, ascension to the throne, and the enigmatic circumstances of his death, whether it was a tragic accident, an illness, or a murder. Despite Carter's discovery, Tutankhamun's life story remains veiled in mystery. The tomb was overflowing with artifacts, containing the mummy of the young pharaoh placed in 3 golden coffins and more than 2,000 items. The absence of written documents inside the tomb makes it nearly impossible to construct a coherent narrative of Tutankhamun's life. It is believed that Pharaoh Akhenaten of the 18th dynasty, who ruled Egypt between 1367 to 1350 BCE, and his second wife Kia, were Tutankhamun's parents. Akhenaten replaced all of Egypt's ancient gods with a single sun god named Aten, leading to Tutankhamun's original name meaning, the living image of Aten. However, after the resurgence of polytheism in Egypt 2 or 3 years later, his name was changed to, the living image of Amen, reflecting Tutankhamun's evolving role in the religious landscape. Tutankhamun is thought to have ascended to the throne at the age of 9 and ruled for 10 years. Due to his youth and the lack of older relatives to guide him, his decisions were influenced by his advisor Ai and chief commander Horemheb. Shortly after becoming king, Tutankhamun married his half-sister Ankhesenamun, the granddaughter of Ai and daughter of Akhenaten and his first wife Nefertiti. Details about his reign, which stretched from the city of Amarna on the east bank of the Nile to Memphis, located about 400 kilometers north of Luxor on the river's west bank, are scarce. The influence of Horemheb and Ai likely played a role in convincing Tutankhamun to abandon the Aten religion and return to the traditional gods. Monuments in the Karnak temple in Thebes depict Tutankhamun reintroducing the old religious practices to the people, appointing new priests, and constructing temples. The pharaoh and his wife had 2 stillborn daughters, whose mummies were also found in the tomb. Another known fact is that Tutankhamun passed away at the age of 19. The untimely death of Tutankhamun, just as he reached an age to make independent decisions and lead his people without relying on the advice of Ai and Horemheb, has raised suspicions for many. Immediately following Tutankhamun's death, his widowed wife Ankhesenamun married Ai, her grandfather. Indeed, a betrothal ring bearing the names of Ai and Ankhesenamun has been discovered. With this marriage, Ai, who had no royal lineage, ascended to the throne. Shortly after the marriage, Ankhesenamun's name disappears from the records, likely indicating her demise instigated by Ai. Ankhesenamun wrote one of the most intriguing letters from ancient civilizations shortly before her mysterious disappearance after her husband's death. This letter, penned by Egypt's widowed queen, was written during the late 18th dynasty and found in Hattusa, the capital of the Hittites, located in present-day Bogaskal, Turkey, which was a rising power and a significant threat to Egypt at the time. In the letter addressed to the Hittite king I-Suppiluliumas, Ankhesenamun expressed her desperate situation. "My husband is dead, and I have no son. They say you have many sons. I thought perhaps you could send one of your sons to be my husband. I would never marry one of my servants. I fear this situation." Initially suspicious, the Hittite king sent a messenger to Egypt to uncover the truth. Upon the messenger's return, a second letter, written by the Hittite queen, was presented, approving the marriage and urging the Hittite prince Zenanza to be sent to Egypt. However, Prince Zenanza was likely assassinated on his way to Egypt, possibly by a group opposed to a foreigner ascending the Egyptian throne. This assassination led to a conflict near Kadesh in western Syria, resulting in the defeat of the Egyptians and Hittites. Some argue that the letter was written not by Ankhesenamun but by her mother Nefertiti. However, considering Nefertiti's status as the wife of Akhenaten, with an heir already in place, it seems unlikely that she would send such a letter to a foreign king. The motive behind Ankhesenamun's proposal to surrender her kingdom to a foreign king remains unclear. The lack of an heir left by Tutankhamun may be at the root of this betrayal. One theory suggests that Egyptians, recognizing the impending threat from the Hittites, believed that forming an alliance through marriage would protect Egypt from a Hittite invasion. Perhaps the queen had considered co-ruling the country with the Hittite prince, backed by the support of the Hittite army. But this plan was thwarted by the assassination of Prince Zenanza. Tutankhamun's mummy was first examined by Howard Carter's team in the 1920s, leading to various speculations about how and why the king was killed. In 1968, a group from the University of Liverpool and later in 1978, researchers from the University of Michigan conducted X-ray examinations on Tutankhamun's skull, revealing intentional fractures and signs of bleeding likely caused by a deliberate blow. Considering the evidence obtained from X-ray examinations and the strange events surrounding his death, it is plausible to conclude that King Tut fell victim to murder. However, the identity of the murderer remains unknown. The elderly royal servant, has been pointed to as the prime suspect in the murder of Tutankhamun, the person who benefited the most from the king's death. Remained on the throne for approximately 4 years after Tutankhamun's death. While this may seem like a sufficient motive for murder, there is no evidence to prove I's involvement in the crime today. Some researchers, however, believe that young Horemheb, who ascended to the throne after around 1321 BCE, as the last pharaoh of the 18th dynasty, is responsible for the murder. Horemheb ruled Egypt for 27 years, during which Egypt underwent significant changes and experienced a period that would later be reminiscent of its ancient power and stability. Horemheb was also determined to preserve Egypt's ancient religion and traditions, as he ordered the destruction of all idols of Aten. The removal of Tutankhamun's name from the list of Egypt's classical kings was likely due to Horemheb taking control of all of Tutankhamun's works, including those in Karnak and Luxor. So, was it or Horemheb who orchestrated Tutankhamun's death, or perhaps both? In January 2005, the first ever CAT examination was conducted on Tutankhamun's mummy, specifically on 3,300 bones of his skeleton. Interestingly, researchers found no evidence of a blow to Tutankhamun's head or signs of violence on his body. The report indicated that a bone fragment had likely shifted during the previous X-ray examination when the mummy was being embalmed. Tutankhamun's brain was removed from the skull during mummification and replaced with resin, which hardened over time. If the bone fragment in the skull had been broken due to an action before the king's death, it would not have remained loose. Researchers had placed a stick behind the skull during the photography process after Howard Carter's discovery to keep it upright. Many previous researchers believed the dark area at the back of the skull was due to this. The general consensus among researchers is that Tutankhamun was slim and healthy, standing at around 1.75 meters tall. French, American, and Egyptian painters, using high-resolution prints derived from CAT scans, drew Tutankhamun's face, and the images from all three were similar. These depictions resembled not only the famous mask attached to the king's mummy but also the figure of Tut in the famous painting depicting the sunrise of the sun god from a lotus flower. However, the question remained, how did the king die? Upon examining Tutankhamun's body, the group found a fracture on the left thigh, believed to have occurred either during Howard Carter and his team's embalming process or after mummification. Further investigations revealed that this fracture happened a few days before Tutankhamun's death, likely leading to gangrene and contributing to the king's rapid demise. This evidence contradicted conspiracy theories suggesting Ay and Horemheb were responsible for Tutankhamun's death. The fracture may have occurred during a hunting expedition, and the lack of timely intervention might have allowed an infection to develop. Whether Ay and Horemheb did everything in their power to prevent the king's death due to this infection remains an open question. Tutankhamun ascended to the throne around the age of 9 and reigned until his death around the age of 19. The preeminent action of his reign is the countermanding of the religio-political changes enacted by his predecessor, Akhenaten, during the Amarna period. He restored the traditional polytheistic form of ancient Egyptian religion, undoing the religious shift known as Atenism, and moved the royal court away from Akhenaten's capital, Amarna. Also, Tutankhamun was one of few kings worshipped as a deity during his lifetime. This was usually done posthumously for most pharaohs. In popular culture today, Tutankhamun is known for the vastly opulent wealth found during the 1922 discovery of his tomb, KV-62, the only such tomb to date to have been found in near-intact condition. The discovery of his tomb is widely considered one of the greatest archaeological discoveries of all time. Since then he has been referred to colloquially as King Tut. Tutankhamun acquired kingship during a tumultuous time period. Akhenaten's Atenism had engendered nationwide destabilization, and his successor, likely Tutankhamun's paternal older half-brother, Smenkhare, had an abruptly short reign. This was followed by another abruptly short reign of Nefertiti, likely Smenkhare's widow, Meriteten. It was under these tenuous circumstances that after Nefertiti's death, Tutankhamun inherited the throne and expounded the reversal of Atenism, which involved extensive reconstruction and the reconsecration of the traditional cults and clergymen, as evidenced most eminently by the artifact known as the Restoration Stela. During this time, the traditional cult of the god Amun was re-established, and the king subsequently retitled himself from Tutankhaten to Tutankhamun. In accordance with this, his wife also retitled herself from Ankhesenaten to Ankhesenamun. Following Tutankhamun's untimely death after a decade reign, his vizier, and perhaps granduncle, Ay, assumed the throne, likely marrying Ankhesenamun, despite Tutankhamun's commander-in-chief, Horemheb, being designated by Tutankhamun as heir. Ay's reign was abruptly short, and Horemheb became pharaoh next, also possibly briefly marrying Ankhesenamun until her untimely death a couple years into Horemheb's lengthy reign. Horemheb was able to secure the throne due to the death of Ay's designated heir, Generalissimo Nakhmon, toward the end of Ay's reign. It was Horemheb who saw to it that the restoration of the traditional ancient Egyptian religion was completed, restabilizing the nation. In due course, Horemheb had selected then civilian military officer, Ramesses I, as heir to the throne, who already had a grandson, Ramesses II, who would then go on to become the third pharaoh of the 19th dynasty. Tutankhamun, whose original name was Tutankhaten or Tutankhaten, was born during the reign of Akhenaten, during the late 18th dynasty of Egypt. Akhenaten's reign was characterized by a dramatic shift in ancient Egyptian religion, known as Atenism, and the relocation of the capital to the site of Amarna, which gave its name to the modern term for this era, the Amarna period. Toward the end of the Amarna period, two other pharaohs appear in the record who were apparently Akhenaten's co-regents. Nefertiti, a female ruler who may have been Akhenaten's wife Nefertiti or his daughter Meriteten, and Smenkhkare, whom some Egyptologists believe was the same person as Nefertiti but most regard as a distinct figure. It is uncertain whether Smenkkare's reign outlasted Akhenaten's, whereas Nefertiti is now thought to have become co-regent shortly before Akhenaten's death and to have reigned for some time after it. His names, Tutankhaten and Tutankhamen, are thought to have meant living image of Aten and living image of Amen in the ancient Egyptian language, with the god Aten having been replaced by the god Amen after Akhenaten's death. Some Egyptologists, including Batisco Gun, have claimed that the translation may be incorrect, instead being closer to the life of Aten is pleasing, or one perfect of life is Aten. Genealogy and Population Affinities, a genetic study, published in 2020, revealed Tutankhamen had the haplogroups YDNAR1b, which originated in Western Asia and which today makes up 50 to 60% of the genetic pool of modern Europeans, and mtDNAK, which originated in the Near East. He shares this haplogroup with his father, the KV55 mummy, and grandfather, Amenhotep III, and his mtDNA haplogroup with his mother, the younger lady, his grandmother, Taya, and his great-grandmother, Thuya. The profiles for Tutankhamen and Amenhotep III were incomplete and the analysis produced differing probability figures despite having concordant allele results. Because the relationships of these two mummies with the KV55 mummy had previously been confirmed in an earlier study, the haplogroup prediction of both mummies could be derived from the full profile of the KV55 data in 2022. SOY Keita analyzed 8 short tandem loci data originally published by Hawass et al. in studies from 2010 and 2012. The first of these studies had investigated familial relationships among 11 royal mummies of the New Kingdom, which included Tutankhamen and Amenhotep III, as well as potential inherited disorders and infectious diseases. The second of these studies had investigated the Y haplogroups and genetic kinship of Ramesses III and an unknown man buried along with him in the royal cache at Deir el-Bahari. Keita analyzed the STR data from these studies using an algorithm that only has 3 choices: Eurasians, Sub-Saharan Africans, and East Asians. Using these 3 options, Keita concluded that the majority of the samples had a population affinity with Sub-Saharan Africans in one affinity analysis. However, Keita cautioned that this does not mean that the royal mummies lacked other affiliations, which he argued had been obscured in typological thinking. Keita further added that different data and algorithms might give different results, reflecting the complexity of biological heritage and the associated interpretation. His parentage is debated, as they are not attested in surviving inscriptions. DNA testing has identified his father as the mummy within tomb KV55, thought to be the pharaoh Akhenaten. His mother was identified as a mummy from tomb KV35, which was also his aunt, and formally referred to as the younger lady, but is otherwise unknown. An inscription from Hermopolis refers to Tutankhaten as a king's son, and he is generally thought to have been the son of Akhenaten, although some suggest instead that Smenkhkare was his father. Inscriptions from Tutankhamun's reign treat him as a son of Akhenaten's father, Amenhotep III, but that is only possible if Akhenaten's 17-year reign included a long co-regency with his father, a possibility that many Egyptologists once supported but is now being abandoned. While some suggestions have been made that Tutankhamun's mother was Menkaure, the second daughter of Akhenaten and Nefertiti, based on a relief from the royal tomb at Amarna, this possibility has been deemed unlikely given that she was about 10 years old at the time of her death. Another interpretation of the relief names Nefertiti as his mother. Meritaten has also been put forward as his mother based on a re-examination of a box lid and coronation tunic found in his tomb. Tutankhamun was wet-nursed by a woman named Maya, known from her tomb at Saqqara. In 2008, genetic analysis was carried out on the mummified remains of Tutankhamun and others thought or known to be New Kingdom royalty by a team from University of Cairo. The results indicated that his father was the mummy from tomb KV55, identified as Akhenaten, and that his mother was the mummy from tomb KV35, known as the younger lady, who was found to be a full sister of her husband. The team reported it was over 99.99% certain that Amenhotep III was the father of the individual in KV55, who was in turn the father of Tutankhamun. More recent genetic analysis, published in 2020, revealed Tutankhamun shared his Y haplogroup with his father, the KV55 mummy, and grandfather, Amenhotep III, and his mtDNA haplogroup with his mother, the younger lady, his grandmother, Taya, and his great-grandmother, Thuya, upholding the results of the earlier genetic study. The identity of the younger lady is unknown, but she cannot be Nefertiti, as she was not known to be a sister of Akhenaten. However, researchers such as Mark Gabold and Aidan Dodson claim that Nefertiti was indeed Tutankhamun's mother. In this interpretation of the DNA results, the genetic closeness is not due to a brother-sister pairing but the result of 3 generations of first-cousin marriage, making Nefertiti a first cousin of Akhenaten. The validity and reliability of the genetic data from mummified remains has been questioned due to possible degradation due to decay. Children within tomb KV21, the mummy KV21A was identified as having been the biological mother of Tutankhamun's 2 daughters. It is therefore speculated that this mummy is of his only known wife, Ankhesenamun, who was his paternal half-sister. Their 2 daughters were identified as the 317A and 317B mummies. Daughter 317A was born prematurely at 5 to 6 months of pregnancy, while daughter 317B was born at full term, though both died in infancy. When Tutankhaten became king, he married Ankhesenpaten, one of Akhenaten's daughters, who later changed her name to Ankhesenamun. They had 2 daughters, neither of whom survived infancy. While only an incomplete genetic profile was obtained from the 2 mummified fetuses, it was enough to confirm that Tutankhamun was their father. Likewise, only partial data for the 2 female mummies from KV21 has been obtained so far. KV21A has been suggested as the mother of the fetuses, but the data is not statistically significant enough to allow her to be securely identified as Ankhesenamun. Computed tomography studies published in 2011 revealed that one daughter was born prematurely at 5 to 6 months of pregnancy and the other at full term, 9 months. Tutankhamun's death marked the end of the royal bloodline of the 18th dynasty. Tutankhamun was between 8 and 9 years of age when he ascended the throne and became pharaoh, taking the throne name Nebkheperer. He reigned for about 9 years. During Tutankhamun's reign, the position of vizier was split between Upper and Lower Egypt. The principal vizier for Upper Egypt was Usermontu. Another figure named Pentju was also vizier, but it is unclear of which lands. It is not entirely known if Tutankhamun's successor, actually held this position. A gold foil fragment from KV58 seems to indicate, but not certainly, that I was referred to as a priest of Mayat along with an epithet of vizier, doer of Mayat. The epithet does not fit the usual description used by the regular vizier but might indicate an informal title. It might be that I used the title of vizier in an unprecedented manner. An Egyptian priest named Manetho wrote a comprehensive history of ancient Egypt where he refers to a king named Horus, who ruled for 36 years and had a daughter named Ascension who reigned 12 years, and her brother Rathotis who ruled for only 9 years. The Amarna rulers are central in the list, but which name corresponds with which historic figure is not agreed upon by researchers. Horus and Ascension have been identified with Horemheb and Akhenaten, and Rathotis with Tutankhamun. The names are also associated with Smenkhare, Amenhotep III, I, and the others in differing order. In order for the pharaoh, who held divine office, to be linked to the people and the gods, special epithets were created for them at their accession to the throne. The ancient Egyptian titulary also served to demonstrate one's qualities and link them to the terrestrial realm. The 5 names were developed over the centuries, beginning with the Horus name. Tutankhamun's original nomen, Tutankhaten, did not have a Nebati name or a gold falcon name associated with it, as nothing has been found with a full 5-name protocol. Tutankhaten was believed to mean living image of Aten as far back as 1877. However, not all Egyptologists agree with this interpretation. English Egyptologist Battiscombe Gunn believed that the older interpretation did not fit with Akhenaten's theology. Gunn believed that such a name would have been blasphemous. He saw Tut as a verb and not a noun, and gave his translation in 1926 as "The Life of Aten is Pleasing." Professor Gerhard Fecht also believed the word Tut was a verb. He noted that Akhenaten used tit as a word for image, not Tut. Fecht translated the verb Tut as to be perfect, complete. Using Aten as the subject, Fecht's full translation was, "One perfect of life is Aten." The Hermopolis block has a unique spelling of the first nomen written as Tutankhaten. It uses Ankh as a verb, which does support the older translation of living image of Aten. At the beginning of Tutankhaten's reign, the royal court was still located at Amarna, and evidence from his tomb shows that the Aten was still acknowledged. But several pieces of evidence suggest that his court was trying to reconcile Atenism with the traditional religion, and activity at Amarna decreased during the first 4 years of his reign. These years saw dramatic reversals of Akhenaten's policies, which, given the king's young age, must have been instigated by his advisors. In the 3rd year of Tutankhaten's reign, his name was changed to Tutankhamun, and that of his queen to Akhizanamun. The Restoration Stela, which probably dates to year 4 of Tutankhamun's reign, characterizes the Amarna period as a time of disaster, saying, "Temples and the estates of the gods and goddesses from Elephantine to the marshes of the delta had fallen into ruin. If you asked a god for advice, he would not attend, and if one spoke to a goddess likewise she would not attend." The stela proclaims the rebuilding of the traditional cults. Priests and other members of temple staffs were restored to their former positions. Around this time, the royal court abandoned Amarna. Memphis became the main seat of royal administration, continuing a trend that dated back to Akhenaten's predecessors, toward administering the country from that central location rather than the more outlying site of Thebes. With Amun restored as Egypt's preeminent deity, Thebes once again became its greatest center of religious activity. The country was economically weak and in turmoil following the reign of Akhenaten. Diplomatic relations with other kingdoms had been neglected, and Tutankhamun sought to restore them, in particular with the Mitanni. Evidence of his success is suggested by the gifts from various countries found in his tomb. Despite his efforts for improved relations, battles with Nubians and Asiatics were recorded in his mortuary temple at Thebes, both victories for Egypt. Also, as far as is known, Tutankhamun's military reign was undefeated, and is one of several other undefeated reigns in ancient Egypt's history. Battle participation: the extent to which Tutankhamun participated in battles is an open question and has yet to reach consensus among researchers. On one hand,
His tomb contained extensive military armament, such as bows, khapesh swords, daggers, wrist guards, maces, shields and a club, suggesting he had extensive weaponry training.
Some imagery, while likely figurative, does depict Tutankhamun as directly participatory in warfare, such as the graphic battle depictions on the painted treasure chest in his tomb. Other artifacts, such as the 9 bows footstool, walking sticks and sandals depicting enemies, and a gold leaf picture of him during chariot archery against enemies, also suggest that he was actively engaged in Egypt's international conflict.
Egyptologist Bob Breyer has argued leaning towards Tutankhamun being an actively participating warrior in his later years. On the other hand, given Tutankhamun's youth and hypothesized physical disabilities, like a speculated cane handicap, some historians are skeptical that he participated in these battles. Yet some experts, such as Sophia Aziz, Campbell Price and Ruksha Dave, have taken the position that the speculations of Tutankhamun's physical frailty are overestimated, arguing that mummy damage has led to misdiagnosis. Instead, they argue that the more rigorous, scientific view is that he was physically active and perhaps militarily participatory. Egyptologist Charlotte Booth states that Tutankhamun participated in at least 2 battles, nevertheless noting that other researchers suggest that he may have only accompanied the army to the battlefield for moral support, as opposed to actively participating. Monuments and construction. Tutankhamun enriched and endowed the priestly orders of 2 important cults, initiated a restoration process for old monuments that were damaged during the Amarna period, and reburied his father's remains in the Valley of the Kings. Given his age, the king probably had advisors which presumably included Ai and General Horemheb, Ai's possible son-in-law and successor. Horemheb records that the king appointed him lord of the land as hereditary prince to maintain law. He also noted his ability to calm the young king when his temper flared. In his 3rd regnal year, Tutankhamun reversed several changes made during his father's reign. He ended the worship of the god Aten and restored the god Amun to supremacy. The ban on the cult of Amun was lifted and traditional privileges were restored to its priesthood. The capital was moved back to Thebes and the city of Akhetaten was abandoned. As part of the restoration of the traditional cults, the king initiated building projects, in particular at Karnak in Thebes, where he laid out the Sphinx Avenue leading to the Temple of Mut. The sphinxes were originally made for Akhenaten and Nefertiti. They were given new ram heads and small statues of the king. At Luxor Temple he completed the decoration of the entrance colonnade of Amenhotep III. Tutankhamun made several endowments that enriched and added to the priestly numbers of the cults of Amun and Ptah. He commissioned new statues of the deities from the best metals and stone and had new processional barks made of the finest cedar from Lebanon and had them embellished with gold and silver. A building called the Temple of Nebkheperer, beloved of Amun, who puts Thebes in order, which may be identical to a building called Temple of Nebkheper in Thebes, a possible mortuary temple, used recycled talatat from Akhenaten's East Karnak-Aten temples, indicating that the dismantling of these temples was already underway. Many of Tutankhamun's construction projects were uncompleted at the time of his death and were completed by or usurped by his successors, especially Horemheb. The Sphinx Avenue was completed by his successor Ai and the whole was usurped by Horemheb. The restoration stele was usurped by Horemheb. Pieces of the Temple of Nebkheperer in Thebes were recycled into Horemheb's own building projects. Lifetime deification kings were venerated after their deaths through mortuary cults and associated temples. Tutankhamun was one of the few kings worshipped in this manner during his lifetime.
A stela discovered at Karnak and dedicated to Amun-Ra and Tutankhamun indicates that the king could be appealed to in his deified state for forgiveness and to free the petitioner from an ailment caused by sin. Temples of his cult were built as far away as in Kawa and Faras in Nubia. The title of the sister of the viceroy of Kush included a reference to the deified king, indicative of the universality of his cult. Health issues. Tutankhamun's health and early death are heavily debated. The most recent study suggests Tutankhamun had bone necrosis and a possible clubfoot, which may have rendered him dependent on assistive canes. This theory is disputed, as neither the canes nor his sandals show the kinds of the wear expected. He also had other health issues, including scoliosis, and had contracted several strains of malaria. He likely died of complications from a broken leg, possibly compounded by malaria. Tutankhamun was slight of build, and roughly 167 centimeters tall. CT investigations of Tutankhamun's skull revealed an excellent condition of his dentition. He had large front incisors and an overbite characteristic of the Thutmose royal line to which he belonged. Analysis of the clothing found in his tomb, particularly the dimensions of his loincloths and belts, indicates that he had a narrow waist and rounded hips. In attempts to explain both his unusual depiction in art and his early death, it has been theorized that Tutankhamun had gynecomastia, Marfan syndrome, Wilson-Turner X-linked intellectual disability syndrome, Froelich syndrome, adiposogenital dystrophy, Klinefelter syndrome, androgen insensitivity syndrome, aromatase excess syndrome in conjunction with sagittal craniosynostosis syndrome, Antley-Bixler syndrome or one of its variants. It has also been suggested that he had inherited temporal lobe epilepsy in a bid to explain the religiosity of his great-grandfather Thutmose IV and father Akhenaten in their early deaths. However, caution has been urged in this diagnosis. In 1980, James Harris and Edward F. Wente conducted X-ray examinations of New Kingdom pharaohs' crania and skeletal remains, which included the mummified remains of Tutankhamun. The authors determined that the royal mummies of the 18th dynasty bore strong similarities to contemporary Nubians with slight differences. In January 2005, Tutankhamun's mummy was CT scanned. The results showed that the young king had a partially cleft hard palate and possibly a mild case of scoliosis. Additionally, he was diagnosed with a flat right foot with hypophalangism, while his left foot was clubbed and had bone necrosis of the second and third metatarsals, Freiberg disease or Kohler disease too. However, the clubfoot diagnosis is disputed. James Gamble instead suggests that the position is a result of Tutankhamun habitually walking on the outside of his foot due to the pain caused by Kohler disease too. This theory has been refuted by members of Hawass' team. The condition may have forced Tutankhamun to walk with the use of a cane, many of which were found in his tomb. However, none of them show the wear expected of essential aids. The wear on his sandals, where present, is also even on both feet. The presence of such a number of sticks is not unexpected, as canes were a symbol of status in ancient Egypt. Genetic testing through STR analysis rejected the hypothesis of gynecomastia and craniosynostosis or Marfan syndrome. Genetic testing for STEVOR, AMA1, or MSP1 gene specific for Plasmodium falciparum revealed indications of malaria tropica in 4 mummies, including Tutankhamun's. This is currently the oldest known genetic proof of the ailment. The team discovered DNA from several strains of the parasite, indicating that he was repeatedly infected with the most severe strain of malaria. His malaria infections may have caused a fatal immune response in the body or triggered circulatory shock. The CT scan also showed that he had experienced a compound left leg fracture. This injury being the result of modern damage was ruled out based on the ragged edges of the fracture. Modern damage features sharp edges. Embalming substances were present within the fracture, indicating that it was associated with an open wound. No signs of healing were present. A facial reconstruction of Tutankhamun was carried out in 2005 by the Egyptian Supreme Council of Antiquities and National Geographic. 3 separate teams, Egyptian, French, and American, worked separately to approximate the face of the boy king. While the Egyptian and French teams knew their subject was Tutankhamun, the American team worked blind. All teams produced very similar results, but it was that of the French team that was ultimately cast in silicone. Criticism. Stuart Tyson Smith, Egyptologist and professor of anthropology at University of California, Santa Barbara, in 2008 expressed criticism of the forensic reconstruction in a journal review. He noted that Tutankhamun's face was depicted as very light-skinned, reflecting a bias among media outlets. Smith further added that Egyptologists have been strangely reluctant to admit that the ancient Egyptians were rather dark-skinned Africans, especially the farther south one goes. In 1922, a team led by British Egyptologist Howard Carter in the Valley of the Kings excavated Tutankhamun's tomb, in an effort that was funded by British aristocrat George Herbert. The discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb received worldwide press coverage. With over 5,000 artifacts, it gave rise to renewed public interest in ancient Egypt, for which Tutankhamun's mask, now preserved at the Egyptian Museum, remains a popular symbol. Some of his treasure has traveled worldwide with unprecedented response. The Egyptian government allowed tours beginning in 1961. The deaths of some individuals who were involved in the unearthing of Tutankhamun's mummy have been popularly attributed to the curse of the pharaohs, due to the similarity of their circumstances. Tutankhamun was buried in a tomb that was unusually small considering his status. His death may have occurred unexpectedly, before the completion of a grander royal tomb, causing his mummy to be buried in a tomb intended for someone else. This would preserve the observance of the customary 70 days between death and burial. His tomb was robbed at least twice in antiquity, but based on the items taken and the evidence of restoration of the tomb after the intrusions, these robberies likely took place within several months at most of the initial burial. The location of the tomb was lost because it had come to be buried by debris from subsequent tombs, and workers' houses were built over the tomb entrance. Rediscovery. The concession rights for excavating the Valley of the Kings was held by Theodore Davis from 1905 until 1914. In that time, he had unearthed 10 tombs including the nearly intact but non-royal tomb of Queen Taya's parents, Yuya and Thuya. As he continued working there in the later years, he uncovered nothing of major significance. Davis did find several objects in KV 58 referring to Tutankhamun, which included knobs and handles bearing his name, most significantly the embalming cache of the king, KV 54. He believed this to be the pharaoh's lost tomb and published his findings as such with the line, "I fear the Valley of the Tombs is exhausted." In 1907, Howard Carter was invited by William Garstin and Gaston Maspero to excavate for George Herbert, 5th Earl of Carnarvon in the valley. The Earl of Carnarvon and Carter had hoped this would lead to their gaining the concession when Davis gave it up, but had to be satisfied with excavations in different parts of the Theban necropolis for 7 more years. After a systematic search beginning in 1915, Carter discovered the actual tomb of Tutankhamun in November 1922. An ancient stroke of luck allowed the tomb to survive to modern times. The tomb's entrance was buried by mounds of debris from the cutting of KV9 over 150 years after Tutankhamun's burial. Ancient workmen's huts were also built on the site. This area remained unexcavated until 1922 due to its proximity to KV-9, as excavations would impede tourist access to that tomb. Carter commenced excavations in early November 1922, before the height of the tourist season. The first step of the tomb's entrance staircase was uncovered on the 4th of November 1922. According to Carter's account, the workmen discovered the step while digging beneath the remains of the huts. Other accounts attribute the discovery to a boy digging outside the assigned work area. By February 1923, the antechamber had been cleared of everything but 2 sentinel statues. A day and time were selected to unseal the tomb with about 20 appointed witnesses that included Lord Carnarvon, several Egyptian officials, museum representatives and the staff of the government press bureau. On the 17th of February 1923 at just after 2 o'clock, the seal was broken. Letters published in 2022 of correspondence between Rex Engelbach and Alan Gardiner revealed that Howard Carter had stolen objects from the tomb, such as a WHM amulet, before the tomb was officially opened. Rex Engelbach said in a letter to Gardiner about a WHM amulet, gifted to Gardiner from Carter, that the WHM amulet you showed me has been undoubtedly stolen from the tomb of Tutankhamun. Contents: there were 5,398 items found in the tomb, including a solid gold coffin, face mask, thrones, archery bows, trumpets, a lotus chalice, 2 Immate fetishes, gold toe stalls, furniture, food, wine, sandals, and fresh linen underwear. Howard Carter took 10 years to catalog the items. Recent analysis suggests a dagger recovered from the tomb had an iron blade made from a meteorite. Study of artifacts of the time, including other artifacts from Tutankhamun's tomb, could provide valuable insights into metalworking technologies around the Mediterranean at the time. Complete study of the iron artifacts from the tomb demonstrated that all were made of similar material. Only in 2022, a complex technological and material study of the Tutankhamun's mask was published. Many of Tutankhamun's burial goods show signs of being adapted for his use after being originally made for earlier owners, probably Smenkhare or Nefertiti or both. On the 4th of November 2007, 85 years to the day after Carter's discovery, Tutankhamun's mummy was placed on display in his underground tomb at Luxor, when the linen-wrapped mummy was removed from its golden sarcophagus to a climate-controlled glass box. The case was designed to prevent the heightened rate of decomposition caused by the humidity and warmth from tourists visiting the tomb. In 2009, the tomb was closed for restoration by the Ministry of Antiquities and the Getty Conservation Institute. While the closure was originally planned for 5 years to restore the walls affected by humidity, the Egyptian Revolution of 2011 set the project back. The tomb reopened in February 2019. Rumored curse for many years, rumors of a curse of the pharaohs, persisted, emphasizing the early death of some of those who had entered the tomb. The most prominent was George Herbert, 5th Earl of Carnarvon, who died on the 5th of April 1923, 5 months after the discovery of the first step leading down to the tomb on the 4th of November 1922. The cause of Carnarvon's death was pneumonia supervening on erysipelas. The Earl had been in an automobile accident in 1901, making him very unhealthy and frail. His doctor recommended a warmer climate, so in 1903 the Carnarvons traveled to Egypt, where the Earl became interested in Egyptology. Along with the stresses of the excavation, Carnarvon was already in a weakened state when an infection led to pneumonia. A study showed that of the 58 people who were present when the tomb and sarcophagus were opened, only 8 died within a dozen years. Howard Carter died of lymphoma in 1939 at the age of 64. The last survivors included Lady Evelyn Herbert, Lord Carnarvon's daughter, who was among the first people to enter the tomb after its discovery in November 1922, who lived for a further 57 years and died in 1980, and American archaeologist J. O. Kinnaman, who died in 1961, 39 years after the event. Tutankhamun's fame is primarily the result of his well-preserved tomb and the global exhibitions of his associated artifacts. As John Manship White writes, in his foreword to the 1977 edition of Carter's The Discovery of the Tomb of Tutankhamun, the pharaoh who in life was one of the least esteemed of Egypt's pharaohs has become in death the most renowned. The discoveries in the tomb were prominent news in the 1920s. Tutankhamun came to be called by a modern neologism, King Tut. Ancient Egyptian references became common in popular culture, including Tin Pan Alley songs. The most popular of the latter was Old King Tut by Harry von Tilzer from 1923, which was recorded by such prominent artists of the time as Jones and Hare and Sophie Tucker. King Tut became the name of products, businesses, and the pet dog of U.S. President Herbert Hoover. While the Treasures of Tutankhamun exhibit was touring the United States in 1978, comedian Steve Martin wrote a novelty song, King Tut. Originally performed on Saturday Night Live, the song was released as a single and sold over 1 million copies. In 2023, an extinct whale discovered in the Eocene deposits of Egypt was named Tutsitas, after Tutankhamun, due to the small size and immature age of the type specimen. Tutankhamun's artifacts have traveled the world with unprecedented visitorship. The exhibitions began in 1962 when Algeria won its independence from France. With the ending of that conflict, the Louvre Museum in Paris was quickly able to arrange an exhibition of Tutankhamun's treasures through Christiane Desroches' noble court. The French Egyptologist was already in Egypt as part of a UNESCO appointment. The French exhibit drew 1.2 million visitors. Noble Court had also convinced the Egyptian Minister of Culture to allow British photographer George Rainbird to re-photograph the collection in color. The new color photos as well as the Louvre exhibition began a Tutankhamun revival. In 1965, the Tutankhamun exhibit traveled to Tokyo National Museum in Tokyo, Japan, where it garnered more visitors than the future New York exhibit in 1979. The exhibit next moved to the Kyoto Municipal Museum of Art in Kyoto with almost 1.75 million visitors, and then to the Fukuoka Prefectural Cultural Hall in Fukuoka. The blockbuster attraction exceeded all other exhibitions of Tutankhamun's treasures for the next 60 years. The Treasures of Tutankhamun tour ran from 1972 to 1979. This exhibition was first shown in London at the British Museum from the 30th of March until the 30th of September 1972. More than 1.6 million visitors saw the exhibition. The exhibition moved on to many other countries, including the United States, Soviet Union, Japan, France, Canada, and West Germany. The Metropolitan Museum of Art organized the U.S. exhibition, which ran from the 17th of November 1976 through the 15th of April 1979. More than 8 million attended. The showing in the United States was part of a diplomatic effort begun by Henry Kissinger to further convince Americans of the value of Egypt as an ally. It traveled first to Washington, D.C., then Chicago, New Orleans, Los Angeles, and Seattle, and finished in New York. In 2005, Egypt's Supreme Council of Antiquities, in partnership with Arts and Exhibitions International and the National Geographic Society, launched a tour of Tutankhamun treasures and other 18th dynasty funerary objects, this time called Tutankhamun and the Golden Age of the Pharaohs. It featured the same exhibits as Tutankhamun, the Golden Hereafter, in a slightly different format. It was expected to draw more than 3 million people but exceeded that with almost 4 million people attending just the first 4 tour stops. The exhibition started in Los Angeles, then moved to Fort Lauderdale, Chicago, Philadelphia and London before finally returning to Egypt in August 2008. An encore of the exhibition in the United States ran at the Dallas Museum of Art. After Dallas, the exhibition moved to the De Young Museum in San Francisco, followed by the Discovery Times Square Exposition in New York City. The exhibition visited Australia for the first time, opening at the Melbourne Museum for its only Australian stop before Egypt's treasures returned to Cairo in December 2011. The exhibition included 80 exhibits from the reigns of Tutankhamun's immediate predecessors in the 18th dynasty, such as Hatshepsut, whose trade policies greatly increased the wealth of that dynasty and enabled the lavish wealth of Tutankhamun's burial artifacts, as well as 50 from Tutankhamun's tomb. The exhibition did not include the gold mask that was a feature of the 1972–1979 tour, as the Egyptian government has decided that damage which occurred to previous artifacts on tours precludes this one from joining them. In 2018, it was announced that the largest collection of Tutankhamun artifacts, amounting to 40% of the entire collection, would be leaving Egypt again in 2019 for an international tour entitled King Tut, Treasures of the Golden Pharaoh. The 2019–2022 tour began with an exhibit called Tutankhamun, Pharaoh's Treasures, which launched in Los Angeles and then traveled to Paris. The exhibit featured at the Grande Halle de la Villette in Paris ran from March to September 2019. The exhibit featured 150 gold coins, along with various pieces of jewelry, sculpture and carvings, as well as the renowned gold mask of Tutankhamun. Promotion of the exhibit filled the streets of Paris with posters of the event. The exhibit moved to London in November 2019 and was scheduled to travel to Boston and Sydney when the COVID-19 pandemic interrupted the tour. On the 28th of August 2020, the artifacts that made up the temporary exhibition returned to the Egyptian Museum, Cairo, and other institutions. The treasures will be permanently housed in the new Grand Egyptian Museum in Cairo, expected to open between October 2023 and February 2024.